everyone to our episode 49 of our section Drops of Wisdom. In today's episode, we are going to talk about the book of the story of the human body, and the author is Daniel Lieberman. We are going to speak about how do you want to age? What is the ability and responsibility that we have in order to age much better? Aging, evolving, adapting to new circumstances in life doesn't have to be painful or deleterious in terms of your body and brain skills. We make our lives more complicated by not paying attention to our body and mind. However, if you simply don't care about how you treat your body and mind, of course, it is obvious that the outcome will be symptoms. This is imbalance, which will lead to chronic ailments that will be much more difficult to resolve. Instead, if you care and act accordingly to the chances of aging gracefully and healthier, you are going to exponentially increase the abilities to become much healthier. So let's start with the fundamentals. According to Darwin, the driving force behind evolution is natural selection, and we have seen that in many areas right now. Just if you are here right now alive, that means you have been adapting well to the phase that we just put behind. Let's call it like that. So this simply means that the best adapted members of a particular species are selected by nature and by the care that you have with your body. Because of that, they survive, grow, and reproduce. Natural selection can be broken down into three separate but interlinked components. First, there is variability. By that, Darwin meant that each individual organism is different from other members of the same species. So this gives you one important factor, that is your uniqueness. No one is exactly like you, and you have much more skills that you think of. So that means that you don't have to be comparing yourself in any other platform. Next comes genetic heritability. Every organism species passes genetic traits on to its offspring, and natural selection is usually driven by negative selection. That's when an organism has negative heritable traits. That doesn't mean that you are doomed to develop a disease or to have a certain chronic exposure. That just means that you have that gene, and that gene will be expressed according to your environment. That is what epigenetics study, and now we know that the environment is much more important than the presence of a gene. So what is the choice that you are giving to yourself in terms of the care that you have with your body and your brain? Negative selection, therefore, will favor the status quo. It likes to leave things as they are. Organisms without significant new heritable traits come out on top. That's essentially a biological process. But what about the environment? What happens with the environment as we just reflected? Dramatic changes occur. Natural selection uses a different tool, which is adaptation, and that describes how an individual develops heritable traits that help it adapt to the new surroundings, and we have experienced that throughout our lives. The more we are exposed to certain kind of challenges and struggles and we overcome them, the stronger we become. If you think that also you are a unique species just because you are human, well, let me just share with you some statistics so that you can see that we are not so different from many of the mammals. Chimpanzees share with us 98% of our genes. 2% might sound like a small change, but it makes a huge difference. But depends on you, of course, and your behavior. We are weaker, we are slower, and we are less agile than our jungle dwelling relatives. So they are twice as fast as us, and they can also lift objects twice as heavy as any other woman or man could manage. Our ancestors had to cover even greater distances if they wanted to eat. That allowed a transition in turning and walking on 2 feet, which was a benefit for us in terms of the metabolic strength that we develop. If a chimp walks upright, it ends up wadding from side to side because its legs are so far apart. That costs a lot of energy. So it is unsurprising that they just don't travel so far. They usually establish themselves in certain parts of the jungle or the woods. Usually no more than 2 or 3 kilometers a day they can walk, but the human torso, by contrast, is largely immobile when we walk. So the energy a chimp burns while covering 3,000 meters sees a human through around 12 kilometers. So the average is 4 times. We can walk 4 times more than they, burning the same amount of energy. That made a huge difference during a drought, for example, or extreme weather. Because humans could walk so far, they were great at finding food that they needed to survive and reproduce. So around more or less 1.9 million years ago, the Homo erectus species walked the earth. This species of archaic humans spread rapidly across Africa, Europe, and Asia. Its success was down to the lifestyle it invented. So this is the lifestyle that we are supposed to have. It was the first hunter-gatherer, and we don't have to be hunters right now, but we have to be hunters in terms of looking for the food that we are consuming and become more selective. Apply natural selection in the food that you are ingesting. So what do they did by hunting and gathering? Essentially, they had 4 components: hunting for meat, gathering edible plants, processing food, and cooperation. Those are the 4 factors that made hunting and gathering a very successful activity, or very successful activities for them to overcome the challenges. So that's what we have to do. Start being more selective in the food that we ingest, investing more time in the processing, and the processing means giving the digestion the time that it needs. So as you become older, you don't really need to eat so much, and you don't need snacks. Your body is strong enough to withstand the fasting periods. So that's becoming more adaptable and cooperating with other people, cooperating with others help us to evolve also. Homo erectus means the upright man. That's a fitting name since it was the posture that it allowed them to live in this way. Homo erectus evolved a tall, slender body and long legs and thick bones that minimize exposure to the sun and provided the ideal setup for long-distance treks. These early humans also evolved a greater number of sweat glands, which cooled the skin, and long nose that humidified the air they breathe, making respiration easier on the lungs. So each of the features that we have right now has evolved through history to allow us to have a much better experience. By using tools like sharp stones to cut the meat into smaller pieces, they were able to free up more time for other tasks. Stone tools serve another purpose too. They were great to pounding tubers and meat. That yielded even more calories because of the effort of doing that. And since digestion was more efficient, the other defining feature of early humans was cooperation and the division of labor. That's what we were supposed to do all the time, and societies would be much, much better if we just applied these simple facts that come from prehistoric times. Cooperation and division of labor, not ambition, not competition, not just these society standards, not this social media comparison, etc. All of that has been um, damaging the evolution and adaptation of human beings instead. So the same applies for the development of the human brain. Because of our ancestors had such large brains, they were slow to grow. That's because brains don't just require a huge amount of energy to run and to perform all the activities. They also take much longer time to develop. A chimp's brain takes until the 3 years, sorry, to reach maturity. A human infant, by contrast, takes 7 years to fully develop the brain and just in one aspect. So slow growth is also energy intensive. That is giving us the clue that our brains needs a lot of energy. In fact, the human requires almost twice as many calories as chimpanzees to reach adulthood. Human brain size also accounts for our need to store fat. That's the reason that we store fat, because our brains need that fat when we don't have or we are not ingesting food. Brains need to be constantly fed with energy sources, and one of the energy sources that comes from fat burning is ketone bodies, and that's something that your brain can use as energy, and it many times is much more efficient than sugar. Even short interruptions to the supply of blood sugar lasting just a minute or two can cause catastrophic damage to the brain. That's why we use that alternative energy source. Storing surplus of energy does make a lot of sense because we have that stored energy in order to burn it. Glycogen is one of the ways that sugar is stored, and the other one, the fat, is also going to release ketone bodies when needed for your brain. Human bodies became fatty to do precisely this. That in turn nudged us further toward the modern man. So as you can see, evolution and adaptation and all of the things that we are living, the struggles, the extreme times that we are living are shaping us into a new species that we are going to evolve if we are responsible with selecting the best things for us as well. So how can I summarize in 2 quotes this information? Well, first, pay attention to a chimp's brain takes 3 years to reach maturity. A human infant, by contrast, needs 7 years, and that is just one part of the evolution of the human brain. And slow growth is also energy intensive. So the energy that you are consuming, it goes a lot of your energy to your brain. So pay attention to that and be more selective in the food that you are consuming. Number 2, when dramatic environmental changes occur, natural selection uses the adaptation tool in order to make us better and stronger. This describes how an individual develops new heritable traits that will help adapt to the new surroundings. We are now a new species just because we survived the pandemic state, and we will become much better if we pay attention to the things that we are consuming in terms of the mind, in terms of the body, and in terms of the spiritual realm. So taking care of these three aspects is essential for our evolution and to become a much better species. I hope that this information has resonated with you. If you like it, please give me a reaction, a comment, or share better the information. Thank you. Have a wonderful Wednesday, and we will see each other next week. Bye.